Deep vein thrombosis. I bet you thought you would never hear those words, but here you are. Maybe you've been diagnosed with DVT or someone close to you has, or maybe you're just marking this biomed project. Either way, do not panic. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about DVT. So let's say you get stabbed. The first thing you want to do is try to stop the bleeding. And your body does this by creating a blood clot through a series of reactions called the coagulation cascade. Coagulate meaning to turn blood into a kind of jelly. The blood clot then seals up the wound and everything is okay. But what happens when your body can't put the brakes on and it keeps on building blood clot after blood clot after blood clot? This is what deep vein thrombosis is. To understand DVT on the protein level, we need to first get a general understanding of the coagulation cascade. That is, how blood clots are formed. The coagulation cascade is just a series of biological steps that happen within your blood vessels to form a blood clot. It starts off with the injured cells sending out a signal saying, "Hey, human is bleeding!" And then, all of these platelets floating in your blood come to the scene and try to block the bleeding. But, as I always say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. These platelets won't go very far by themselves, and this is when the coagulation cascade comes in. Very simply, after many cell signals, an enzyme called thrombin kicks in and starts creating fibrin strands from fibrinogen. These fibrin strands act as a mesh to hold red blood cells and platelets together, which ultimately form the blood clot. This is awesome. But we can't just keep making blood clots, because if we do, and we don't really need to, we get deep vein thrombosis. What is deep vein thrombosis? I'm glad you asked. DVT is a condition where your body keeps making blood clots, which blocks blood flow. Remember, blood carries oxygen. Without oxygen, your tissues will suffocate and die. So, how do we stop forming blood clots? In our bodies, we have a protein called antithrombin, and its job is to inactivate the coagulation cascade by switching thrombin off. To stop it from making blood clots. Antithrombin has two special domains, the heparin binding site and the reactive site. The reactive site is where antithrombin actually binds with thrombin to switch it off. On the other hand, the heparin protein is like a supercharger. When it binds to antithrombin at the heparin binding site, it makes it way faster. It does this by pushing the reactive loop out, making it more exposed so thrombin can more easily bind to it. If these two sites don't work properly, then antithrombin can't do its job and blood clots will continue to form in the body. There are three types of defects that can make antithrombin dysfunctional. The first is type 2A, a defect in the reaction site. The second is type 2B, a defect in the heparin binding site. And the third is type 2C, a defect in both the reactive site and heparin binding site. We're going to look at each case one by one, but first you need to understand how proteins are made in the body. You've probably heard of DNA before, but you might not know what it does specifically. DNA is essentially a blueprint to help cells make proteins, and proteins are very specific. They come in all shapes and sizes and have all types of functions. If we unfold a protein, we'll see a string of amino acids, which are basically subunits of proteins. But these are not just randomly placed amino acids. Instead, the amino acid sequence is very specific, because it's precisely the sequence of amino acids which dictate how a protein is folded. If the protein doesn't fold up correctly, it won't function correctly. Now, this is the amino acid sequence of a functioning antithrombin protein. Here we have 464 amino acids, and each one of these letters represent one amino acid. For example, this reads methionine, tyrosine, serine, and so on. Sometimes the body has a little hiccup and gets the amino acid sequence wrong. And sometimes it's okay and it doesn't make a difference. But other times things go terribly wrong. For example, when the 382nd amino acid changes from alanine to threonine, it creates a defect in the reactive site, meaning antithrombin can't bind with thrombin, meaning thrombin will remain activated. If thrombin remains active, then blood clots will keep building up, and that's when you get type 2A DVT. When the 7th amino acid changes from isoleucine to asparagine, it creates a defect in the heparin binding site, meaning heparin can't bind to antithrombin and is therefore unable to supercharge it. This leaves antithrombin working at a really slow pace, even slower than the rate thrombin is working at. So again, blood clots will keep building up, and this will result in type 2B DVT. And finally, when the 402nd amino acid changes from phenylalanine to cysteine, it creates a defect in both these sites, meaning antithrombin is not only slow at working, but it doesn't bind to thrombin anyway. Again, this means blood clots will keep building up in the body, resulting in type 2C DVT. If your DVT has a genetic root, then it means you have antithrombin proteins which don't work so well. It means blood clots are building up in your body and stopping blood from flowing, which then leads to sudden swelling of the legs, pain or cramps in the affected area, tenderness, and skin that is warm and red in the affected area. You also might notice other parts of your skin becoming blue or very pale, and that's because your tissues are essentially suffocating without the oxygen your blood is supposed to deliver. The simple treatment is to take anticoagulants. They mimic antithrombin by inactivating the coagulation cascade, breaking up blood clots and allowing blood to flow as usual. The only issue is that it is difficult to regulate how much anticoagulants you need. As I mentioned before, the coagulation cascade stops us from bleeding to death. If you keep taking pills that suppress this, you are at risk of bleeding to death. But, to tell you the truth, I am hopeful we can find a better treatment. After all, if you want to go far, go together.